Thanks, Chair. Minister, I'm aware from some Kildare early years childcare providers of delays processing their re-registration, which needs to be completed by the end of the year. I'm just looking to see if you can provide an update on any actions your department has taken to address these delays.
Deputy Minister, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I will take the questions together. The operation and maintenance of the Register of Early Years Services is a matter for TUS, the Child and Family Agency, which of course is the independent statutory regulator. Since this is a regulatory issue, my department does not have a direct role in the processing of registration applications or the maintenance of the register. It was given additional powers in 2016, which included the registration of services. The deadline, as you've said, for re-registration has been known to providers since then. It appears on the registration certificate, and over the past 18 months, TUSLA has been engaging with providers in relation to requirements for re-registration, including through a consultative forum of stakeholders. TUSLA issued further guidance to service providers in August 2019 on specific documentation required on planning permission and as part of the re-registration process. In order to be registered on the 1st of January of 2020, providers must submit an application for re-registration by midnight on the 12th of December 2019. Providers were urged to submit their applications in advance of this date, given the large volume of applications expected. The deadline of the 12th of December was necessary in order to give TUSLA time to process all of those applications. But to minimize uncertainty, providers, last week on the 5th of December, TUSLA issued a further letter to all providers offering assurance that any provider who submits a completed application with the specified essential documents by the 12th of December will be re-registered. All providers who submit a completed application will be issued a further individual confirmation of re-registration by the 20th of December and will be able to continue operation of their service in January. I'm informed by TUSLA that the total number of early years services that are due to re-register by the 31st of December 2019 is 4,117. As of Monday morning, 3,752 services had commenced the application process on the TUSLA portal. Of these, 3,081 applications had been submitted via the online portal for assessment. Therefore, 671 applications are commenced but not yet submitted, and just 365 have yet to start the application process. I have a further update and supplementary to add to that. But submitted applications are currently being processed in batches through a series of specially convened registration panels. So my department has been working closely with TUSLA to ensure that there is adequate staffing in place to process the applications on time and to assist with effective communications to providers. In addition, my department has supported city and county childcare committees to give advice and assistance to providers that need help with re-registration. And in recognition of the difficulties many providers were experiencing in completing re-registration, TUSLA, as you know, decided to revise the timeline for submission of supporting documentation for re-registration. Under the revised arrangements, while providers must apply to TUSLA by the 12th of December, they have until the 30th of June 2020 to provide some of the supporting documentation required, including that on fire safety and planning requirements. On the 27th of November, my department issued a letter informing providers that TUSLA has revised the timeline for submission of supporting documentation for re-registration, and that letter, I think, provided very clear guidance on what is required for the 12th of December and what can be submitted up to the 30th of June.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Hayden, the first supplementary.
Minister, I want to thank you for what is a very comprehensive response, and you've touched on a lot of the complexities that are in the issue there, and obviously very detailed. It would be a concern that as of today, there's 365 that have to start, childcare providers that seem to have to start the process. Are those figures as of today, or is there an update on them? Maybe you alluded to might be an update on them. I think in general, maybe you might just consult with TUSLA in relation to communication. I take your point around consultative forum with stakeholders. Is that with county childcare committees? Because I do find that dealing with early years providers in Kildare, there does seem to be a disconnect in terms of communication, and I presume it's because they're very busy running facilities on a day-to-day basis, and they're the backbone of our childcare system. They provide that safe environment for our children to learn and to play in, and to grow in and develop, and it's really, really important. But I do think maybe we should look at communication, because in an area like this, there's been a lot of stress and concern, and maybe some of the information isn't getting down to the individual childcare providers themselves.
Deputy Andreas Minor. Sorry, Minister. You take the second. Yeah. You're too eager, Minister.
Minister, first of all, to thank you for the comprehensive response on it, and in particular I want to acknowledge the additional time that was notified recently on it. It does give an opportunity to under pressure childcare providers, and it's a huge burden on many of them. They want to be compliant and have everything in order and making every effort on it. The time and the cost, bringing in chartered surveyor, bringing in expensive skills, and it is a burden on the childcare providers, skills that may not be readily available. So I want to acknowledge that, first of all, Minister. But, Minister, at 365 that are not engaged, that's a large number of people. How many of those are from Cork? The question is Cork specific. Can you identify? And also the 600 that are started and didn't follow through. That's almost a quarter that are in question there. Can you clarify how many of those are Cork related? Also, Minister, will these operators be in a position to access further funding given that they won't be fully registered and fully compliant? Parents, for example, who would have been applying for the new affordable childcare scheme want to know that the provider and that the operator will be accessible to them.
Deputy. Thank you. Minister,
and what will their status be in that regard?
Well, thank you. But just to be absolutely clear, and I think you probably are, but that everyone who wants funding from DCYA has to re-register the requirement by the 12th. They have to submit an application by December 12th. So just to be really clear, and that there are there's a certain set of documentations that is required for the 12th of December, and as I said, most of these should be pretty much on-hand Garda vetting for the registered provider, 2 references for the registered provider, certificate that it is registered, the registration number of companies from the registration office, a statement of your purpose and function, a safety statement, signed declaration, etc. So those are pretty straightforward, but they have to submit those by December 12th. Some of the others, planning permission, fire safety, those are more, maybe if those are more complicated, that's what's going, that's again, it's lays clearly out that isn't required until the 20th of June. But you need to put in your application by the 12th of December in order to be re-registered. And I've just received this today. TUSLA put out a press release where they said, so there is an update on the figures, that over 94% of the service providers have applied for a re-registration ahead of the deadline. So it's gone down from the 6, it's now, there's 230 remaining. So I think that's pretty strong, a pretty strong and exceptional result. Here we are. I know it's only, what is today? Maybe just a few days out, another week out. But there are 230 remaining. So I would be absolutely pleading for those who are part of that 230 to put in to re-register, because you cannot get funded if you're not registered, re-registered. And I don't know the number in terms of Cork, but I can see if I can get that information for you. In relation to the question about ongoing consultation. I mean, I hear that in relation to Kildare particularly. I think you're raising that. We'll pass that on to TUSLA. I do have information in relation to the consultative forum and the ongoing engagement with the stakeholders, which I'm also happy to share with you. But I think your general point we hear, and I'll take that back and see if that can
your final supplementary.
Improved.
Thanks very much, Minister. And maybe on that last point first, I'm not aware that there's actually a telephone line, and maybe if childcare providers had a direct line that they could call of TUSLA to ask specific questions, I think that would be most helpful and would maybe take some of that confusion out of it. I don't believe there is a line, a helpline number for them. You might maybe just follow up on that one as well. And look, I'm aware from having talked to the childcare providers that this potentially then has knock-on impacts on their insurance. So obviously it is very serious, as well as the need for them to get that that application, the registration in for funding. In terms of then the registration, how long would it last for, or when will they have to renew that? Is this a once-off, or is this an annual thing, or is it just something that is once-off? And is the registration in any way linked to the National Childcare Scheme? or is this completely different, or is this just in relation to the funding for the early years school providers? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Hayton. Deputy Moynihan, your final supplementary.
I'm going to follow up again, Minister, on the Cork figures, because we want to particularly get an outline of where things stand in that, and if you can provide that to forward them on, I'd be pleased if you could, Minister. Just to clarify, in relation to some 230 at this stage who are not engaged, what's their position next Friday? What's going to happen? Is funding going to be turned off if they're not registered? And where do parents stand in relation to those? Can you clarify on that? And also, Minister, the not engaged people. There's a real concern there. What is their status going to be? And also the many families who are using these services, are they going to be made aware of what's their position going to be on Friday in the event that some or many of these 230 are not registered?
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Your final reply.
Thank you. Cork, yes, I will do my best in relation to the 230 that haven't begun the process. A dedicated phone line. Again, I'll put that request in, to see if that's possible, especially in these last few days. I think what I've been trying to outline in both in the answer to this question as well as at a couple of other points is that the requirement to be re-registered because the registration has been for 3 years. I think it's for 3 years that it is for 3 years following. I need to just check just to absolutely be, to confirm that, but that they have been communicated with from the day from the time that they registered initially that they would require re-registration in a 3-year period. And I've outlined the ways in which TUSLA has had some ongoing communication with providers in that regard. So at the same time, I've run small organizations and businesses and whatever, so I understand that you get to that when you really need to, and there's a little bit of time left. So, as distinct from way ahead. So there are some people who still haven't actually gone on to the portal and put in the registration process, and I understand that, but I am asking and calling out that they do that. If they aren't registered, if they don't do that, then DCYA will not be able to provide funding. And all I'm trying to describe is that I think it's very reasonable the time that people have been given. We have been communicating that it's important to do. If you're having some really difficulty in terms of finding your paperwork or needing to understand how to do it, phone my department. I can, and I understand in terms of TUSLA, but certainly you can get through to my department and ask to be assisted. I just don't, I think it's just important. It is part of the law. It is part of the law that we cannot extend that deadline because it's part of the law.
Thank you, Minister. Moving on to